Let's talk about getting ready for the war. So, getting ready for World War II, why did Canada declare war? Oh, wait a minute. World War I, we declared war because Britain declared war. World War II, we declared war ourselves. We declared war ourselves. So the House of Commons met, and Canada declared war 1 week after Britain. Now, this time around, it will be, as I mentioned, total war. Who's the person put in charge of getting Canada ready for total war? C.D. Howe. And C.D. Howe was, I always said, the Sam Hughes of World War II, but he was a Sam Hughes that didn't suck. Remember? C.D. Howe was responsible for what they call him, the Minister of Everything. His nickname was the Minister of Everything. His job was to take a country that had been in depression and get it ready for a total war, a war where everything that was produced that mattered. So he created crown corporations. That's huge businesses that didn't exist. The government created them so that they could get Canada ready for the war effort. He was allowed to take businesses and say, you're not making this anymore, now you're making this weapon. He actually went into businesses and changed what they were manufacturing to get people ready for the war. He could even draft men, remember? He could take unemployed men and draft them into the workforce. Okay? He could draft them into the workforce. It was called the, I think it was the, oh gosh darn it, the National something movement. I can't remember what it was now. We'll have to go back and check it. So, C.D. Howe, Minister of Everything, gets Canada ready for the war. That's getting them ready, getting troops. They use propaganda again to get people stirred up so they'll volunteer. This sounds familiar. Security-wise, which group in this war are they going to go after? Largely. Japanese and the Japanese internment. We'll talk about them here during the war in a second. But C.D. Howe getting ready for the war is the key piece. I don't think we need to do much beyond that. What's Canada like during the war? Well, I'm told that drives people nuts if they watch online. What was Canada like during the war? Well, let's talk about during the war. Rationing again. Sounds familiar? Income tax is going to go up. Income tax becomes permanent. Have to pay for it somehow, right? So income tax becomes permanent. Debt increases again. So these are all things that are going to take place during the war. Also during the war, two big things. Number one, actually I'll say three. The Japanese internment. Now the Japanese internment happened on the west coast of British Columbia. People who were from a Japanese heritage, even if they were Canadian citizens, were forced to leave the coast, move inland. And when I say move inland, they were put in internment camps, concentration camps. And they lost their businesses, lost their homes. And when they went to go back, their homes and businesses had been taken away from them. At the end of the war, when they went back, they didn't get anything back. It wasn't until about 40 years, 50 years later that they would be apologized to and receive compensation. So they were apologized to, they did receive compensation. Heck, some Japanese Canadians were deported, forced out of the country. And if that was the case, they were given their citizenship back. They were allowed to come back to Canada. Okay? But the Japanese internment was a bit of a black eye, and it really wasn't based on security, it was really based on racism. There was a lot of racism in the West Coast already, and World War II, of course, just allowed these kind of laws to be passed. Earlier than that, we didn't mention this, don't forget that there was other types of racism. The SS St. Louis was a ship with Jews on board, German Jews. They're trying to escape from Germany. They were turned away from Cuba, turned away from the US, and then ultimately would be turned away from Canada. They ended up back in Germany, and many of them died in the concentration camps in Germany. So it was a black eye. We compared that to the Komagata Maru. Obviously more serious for the Jews who were turned away. So that's during. One next piece was during will be conscription. Oh dear. Conscription if necessary, but not necessarily conscription. Remember I told you this story? Mackenzie King, re-election man, manages to get himself re-elected even though he brings in conscription after promising not to have conscription. Crazy talk. Crazy talk. He had something called a plebiscite. Do you remember that? A plebiscite was a vote, are you in favor of bringing in conscription if it's necessary? And people voted yes, except for who? Quebec. French Canadians largely voted against it. And once again, they voted against it because soldiers were being trained in English, not French. And that was a key issue. Now, there were riots in Quebec again. People were really upset. However, was it as violent as World War I? It wasn't. World War I was more violent, more aggressive, and I think we talked about the reasoning for that was, well, at least they had a chance to vote in World War II on the question. And in World War II, let's face it, it was a little more of truly a Canadian war in that Hitler was a very bad dude. And he was, you know, attacking all kinds of places. So the question of whether Canada should be involved in the conflict or not wasn't as significant as in World War I when we weren't really sure why we were there, other than the fact that we're there because we're Britain's kid. That was conscription. I've missed one thing that Anya has already mentioned, and that was, we should mention this, the British Commonwealth Air, what was it called? Training program or something? Yeah. This was really at the start of the war. Mackenzie King wanted to help with the war effort, but he didn't want to send a lot of troops overseas. So he said, we'll pay for this. And they spent $2 billion or something training some incredible number of pilots from all over the Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, India, Britain itself. And they trained them largely in the prairies, obviously, especially out of Winnipeg. That's why we have the Winnipeg Jets. Because the prairies are a long ways away from enemy planes and also very flat. It's a great place to train. So that was something else that happened in Canada during the war. We are close to being done. I'm going to pause it and we're going to jump over to this side.